President Bola Tinubu is seeking the approval of the National Assembly to inject a staggering 6.2 trillion naira into the existing 27.5 trillion naira budget. This proposed increase will raise the total 2024 budget to a whopping 33.7 trillion naira, a significant expansion aimed at funding projects, enhance recurrent expenditure, and supports the president's renewed hope agenda. While some Nigerians have expressed support for the bills, citing the importance of investing in infrastructure and improving the lives of Nigerians, others have raised concerns about the potential impact on the overall economy. Well, let's get talking. I'm being joined this afternoon by the Head Research and Policy Advisory at BudgIT, Mr. Iniobong Usen. Mr. Usen, good afternoon and thank you for coming on the program.
Good afternoon, Tolu, and thanks for having me.
I think I'd like to start this way. 27.57 trillion naira was the figure before now, and now we have 6.2 trillion naira to be added to this, and that will give us 33.7 trillion naira for the 2024 budget. Now, there's going to be an extension for the implementation period of capital budgets beyond 12 calendar months. What does this mean to you at BudgIT, and what's your expected outlook for this spending plan?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Tolu. So I liken Nigeria to that kid who grew up in Banana Island, but due to tragedy has had to move to Ajegunle, but still wants to maintain the lifestyle of a kid who lives in Banana Island. Nigeria is very broke, and the way we've gone about governance, the way we've gone about public expenditure does not denote that we're in tune with realities. If you look at the fiscal account for 2023, from January to December, and this is by the accounts of the Accountant General of the Federation, the federal government was only able to raise about 6 trillion naira, right? If you look at expenditure in that particular year, between January and December, it was close to 20 trillion, meaning that we were in deficit of almost about 14 trillion naira. And mind you, this is a budget that the implementation period has also been extended up until the end of 2024. And you ask yourself, where would the money come from? By the same account of the Accountant General of the Federation, what we're able to get from the domestic market in terms of borrowing was just about 5 trillion naira, meaning that about almost 8 trillion naira thereabouts. As you all know, if they are not getting the borrowings from the capital market, as the case may be, the next point of call is the CBN, which is Ways and Means. I don't have evidence to that effect yet, but by the books, it would seem that that's what is happening at the moment. Now, if you add that to the 27 trillion naira budget, to the 2023 supplementary budget of about 2 trillion, and this additional 6 trillion naira, you ask yourself, where would the money come from to implement this budget? And so I would have expected that the federal government would look inward, look at areas where, we cannot really afford, that kind of opulence, that kind of, extravagance at the moment, cut spending in those areas, and then deploy them to these very critical areas for critical infrastructure that they have identified that they need to implement. In these times, we cannot be building car parks for the National Assembly to the tune of 6 billion naira. We cannot be building palatial mansions for the vice president. We cannot be buying presidential aircraft for the president and the vice president and living as if there's a lot of money to throw around, and then asking people to tighten their belts. It's against, our current fiscal standing, as the case may be. It requires that government looks inward before even going outside to borrow funds, as it looks like it's easy to do now. Cut expenditure where there's potential waste and redirect those funds to critical, areas of the economy that would improve the lives of Nigerians. Take Nigerians out of poverty, the bulk of which are multidimensionally poor, as the case may be. Direct those funds to areas, that would create jobs and grow the economy.
All right, then. Well, let's continue this conversation by, let me ask you that the issue of January to December budget cycle is something that we commended in recent times. But does it look like we are staying with that moving forward?
It doesn't seem that way. Now one of the core principles of public budgeting is the principle of annuality, meaning that for a budget to be credible, right, it has to run from January to December if it's a 12-month calendar year, as the case may be. But the current regime that we see around the extension of the implementation of the budget, has no precedence and there's no provision for this, whether in the Constitution or the Fiscal Responsibility Act, as the case may be. As a matter of fact, the Fiscal Responsibility Act, sort of presumes that by the end of 1 month after the end of each quarter, that a budget implementation report is released to show the performance of that particular quarter. Now, what would happen in this case where the fourth quarter implementation period has been extended by 12 months? That goes against that provision of the Fiscal Responsibility Act that states that, 1 month after the end of the quarter, a budget implementation report be put together and published. So there is no legal or regulatory framework currently in the country that supports this kind of regime. It leads to a lot of confusion. I mean, how can you be implementing 4 budgets at the same time? Mind you, the revenue that would be used in implementing all of these budgets are 2024 revenues. There are no revenues from 2023 that would roll over into 2024. And so the practice should be that whatever project, whatever program doesn't get funding in the 2023 budget or fiscal year be rolled over into the 2024 year, so that you have a very tidy process, as the case may be.
And the Finance Act of 2023 to impose charge a windfall tax on banks, of course, to provide for the administration. Maybe that is part of the revenue, ways of raising revenue by government.
Is that enough? What does government expect to get from this? Is it up to ₦1 trillion? We are talking about budget cumulatively now of almost 40 trillion naira. So where would the money come from?
So what other means are we going to look at? Now, the FRS has been doing so much trying to harmonize the tax system. Of course, we also know that the Taiwo Yedele-led committee has come up with some recommendations that we expect implementation to as soon as possible. But in your thoughts or in your discussion at your own end, what other sources do you think government can explore to raise revenues at this very critical time?
I mean, look at oil revenue. We've been paying lip service to oil theft over the past 2-3 years. We've seen attempts, right, whether it's with the blow-up of vessels carrying crude or people just accidentally finding pipelines, that have been connected, illegal pipelines connected to the regular or mainstream pipelines. But these have just been playing to the gallery, as the case may be. Almost every 3 months, government comes out to tell us that they are going to take oil theft seriously. But that has not reflected in oil production, as the case may be. And looking into the Trump presidency, that is looking very likely, and with his policy position of ramping up oil production in the U.S., there are indications that oil price would fall drastically, next year. Meaning that all of this period of high prices are periods we have not gained from, and we do not intend to gain from. At this point in time, looking at our fiscal space, as shrinking as it is, one would have thought that the oil assets would be considered natural security assets, meaning that the country would deploy all that is necessary to secure those assets, ramp up production, and get this, windfall from oil prices. But it doesn't seem, this is 1 year into the life of this administration. It doesn't seem like anything has changed from what has happened in the last 8 years. And it is indicative that Alhaji Aliko Dangote had mentioned that the mafia in the oil industry, is worse than the mafia in the drug industry. And you would ask yourself, as the Nigerian government succumb to that mafia? They have to answer this question.
The issue of crude oil theft is something that, if we stay with it, we would. But I'll just ask you one more question around that. It seems very clearly that this is like an international crime, because who buys the crude? It's not just something that anybody could just go into to rupture pipelines and all of that. So I think there needs to also be kind of collaboration with the host communities and all of that. The PIA, of course, comes up to address some of these issues. But just before we move back to what we are talking about, do you think that if everyone to come out and, speak with the same voice, this issue of crude oil theft could be addressed? Do you think so?
So this is you assuming that the volume of crude oil that is stolen daily are done by community members. You are talking about 500 to 600 to 700,000 barrels of crude oil stolen daily. It's organized crime.
That's what I'm telling you. That's what I'm saying. So everybody has to be involved. Host community, international oil companies, security agencies. Where is this crude going to? Take it from there.
I agree with you. But then the onus lies on government, right? To be able to put the right infrastructure in place, security infrastructure in place to secure our oil assets. Community members, they play a role in the entire chain, but then their role is very minimal. They do not have the resources of the state to police these pipelines, as the case may be. They do not have the resources of this, the resources to actually, hold up that responsibility that government often puts on them, right? The government has in its retinue the full complementation of the Navy, the full complementation of the Army. It has gone into contracts with private individuals to secure pipelines. And then, you still have the companies on one hand who also have the resources to also secure these assets. So in the entire chain, I wouldn't place, a lot of responsibility on the host communities, because the fraction of what is stolen by community members is infinitesimal. The rate at which oil is being stolen is done at an industrial scale, and it will require the whole of government effort to curb this theft.
Back to our conversation around budgeting now. There seems to be focus also on capital projects by this administration. You would agree with me. A lot of roads are being worked on. Even the big projects, you would agree with me, and they are really cost. These are expensive and will cost a fortune. And everyone would definitely want to finish all of these projects and commission them, because it's not good when you start a project and another. You know the way it works here. So what now are you thinking around capital expenditure, recurrent expenditure for this very 2024 budget as it's outlined? Do you see light at the end of the tunnel?
I wouldn't answer that definitively. What I would say is, the truth is, government does not have all of the revenues to implement the budget. So what needs to happen now is government needs to go back in-house and rationalize the entire budget. What are projects that we can push forward? What are projects that are frivolous? What are projects that do not directly impact the lives of people? For instance, the Lagos-Calabar Coastal Road is one project that I did not think the government would start at this point in time. Looking at, how bad, other existing roads are, right? And the period it would take to implement, or to finish that entire project, the cost of that project as well. And there are so many other projects like that in the 2024 budget that can wait till when maybe we have another windfall from oil, or when there's economic growth to stimulate activity.
When will that be?
Revenues to government. But government needs to go in-house, rationalize the entire budget. There's waste littered across the budget. Identify those projects, pick them further down the line, and focus on projects that would have real impact on the lives of people.
Again, let me take you to issue of Finance Act before we wrap up this conversation. The Finance Act is something that many have commended, saying it comes with the budget system, and of course it helps see a clearer picture of how government intends to raise revenue. But what would you say about the implementation so far? We've started, I think, 2-3 years now coming up with the budget.
So the Finance Act, since its inception in use in Nigeria, has provided sort of the legal framework for how government intends to raise revenue. And it's been effective in that regard, for providing the policy and legal framework. But with regards to the 2023 amendment, which is looking at taxing the windfall from exchange rate gains by the banks, I'm a little on the fence on this, because on one hand, I think the CBN had mentioned that that particular windfall from FX gains be not paid as dividends to shareholders of the banks. But then you now want to tax. We are taught that those would be retained revenues by the banks, but then you now want to tax those revenues. I'm not too sure if that's the route that government should go in that regard, considering the fact that the operating expenses also, of these businesses have also increased. If you look at the cost of running the bank, some of them have had to shut down some branches because of the increase in cost of running the banks, whether it's due to the price of diesel, as the case may be. Some have had to reduce the number of working hours. Some have had to lay off staff. So there are implications with regards to loss of jobs, with regards to taxing these revenues that could otherwise be deployed, to the business of the banks. So I do not know if I, fully support that move, but I would wait for further evidence from government to convince me that it's the right way to go.
A lot is really expected moving forward. I must thank you so much for making sense of this topic for us this afternoon. I've been speaking to Mr. Iniobong Usen, who is the head research and policy advisory at BudgIT Nigeria. Thank you so much. Do enjoy the rest of your day.
Yeah, thanks, Tolu, and thanks for having me. Have a lovely day.
All right, you too. Well, coming up on the show, we'll now shift our focus again to stay with inflation figures, which came up earlier.